The 2026 NFL quarterback class for this year's upcoming class has been under heavy criticism and has been heavily criticized for being possibly one of the weakest that we have seen in years. Maybe dating all the way back to however many years you want to go back. Maybe even worse than the 2022 NFL draft has so many prognosticators and mock drafters across the internet, across the landscape of the NFL draft season frenzy that we have upon us. It is your host, Steven Trader, back here on Steve Money's Take. And today we have ourselves a designated video solely just focusing and just catching a glimmer at the quarterbacks that is the 2026 NFL draft, which is emphatically, undeniably one of the most interesting, polarizing, by far intriguing classes that we've seen in recent memory. I compared it to the 2022 draft. That's the only one that I have of pure recollection that comes to mind, where you had a guy like Kenny Pickett as the only one to go in the first round. And right now, two quarterbacks projected in the first round as it sits right now, so early in the process and pre-combine and pro days and everything else as we loom forward to the draft in Pittsburgh in late April. Without a doubt, the title says it all. The curious case of the 2026 NFL draft class. And today, I am beyond ecstatic, beyond excited to be able to provide you guys with some awesome exclusive content here on my platform today. Ultimately, just talking about what we have, what we're faced with when it comes to this year's crop of guys. And, we're going to break down at least, 10 to 12 quarterbacks maybe in today's video. Could be a little bit of a lengthier one, so if you want to go ahead and just cut to the chase, skip to the parts that you want to see, I absolutely condone that. But look, I'm really excited for this year's draft class, as every draft. But man, when I look at the quarterbacks, I cannot fathom with what everybody else in the mainstream draft media is depicting it as. I've listened to so many guys on so many platforms, including my own personal opinion, which I guess, isn't as mainstream. But I tell you, it's one of the better draft classes that we've seen in terms of finding a guy with a ceiling, a guy with some potential, a guy who is, no scrubs. I don't see a lot of scrubs in this year's draft class. In fact, I do think this year's draft class is brutally underrated. I think there's a hell of a lot of good commodities and prospects out there, to the chagrin of many who have been very hypercritical of the prospects that we have out there for this year's draft. I believe a lot of people are saying this. A lot of people are anticipating that we were going to see more guys of the nature of a Dante Moore, of a guy like Lennar Sellers, Arch Manning, just to name a few guys who I think a lot of people coming into this process were sort of speculating would be here. Obviously, that's not even ceasing to mention guys who had underachieving seasons this past year for teams that were on teams with national championship aspirations, and teams with, guys who had a lot of potential, a lot of Heisman buzz coming into the 2025 college football season. And we'll break down a few of those guys, but let's go ahead and cut to the chase. Let's go ahead and get into it. And obviously, I don't think it goes without saying that, Fernando Mendoza is one of one, okay? He is by far the benchmark prospect of all the quarterbacks here in this, group of guys that we are provided with in this year's draft class. I think he's going to be, his potential is immense. His potential is immense. I think you can make the strong argument that he is the best player in the draft, not only at the quarterback position, but the overall totality of the entire process. Fernando Mendoza is outstanding, man. And we obviously won't, focus solely on him, as is there's so many other guys that I think, a lot of, fans and even a few teams probably out here are very curious to know what there is with a certain player in terms of certain upside. But, man, Fernando Mendoza, you reel the tape, man. Obviously undefeated season in Indiana, greatest season in Indiana history, having a national championship, having a Heisman winner. And Fernando Mendoza is just, he is the heart and soul of IU football, man. And not only that, man, I think he's one of the better quarterback commodities that we've seen the past 5 or 6 years coming out of the collegiate level. I personally believe that I've covered a lot of drafts. I've covered 2 drafts right here on YouTube. This would be my 3rd draft covering on the YouTube platform. But my draft coverage goes all the way back to, when I was a kid in high school, obviously covering guys. You can think back to guys like even as, last year's Cam Ward or a Bryce Young or a Caleb Williams or a Drake May, CJ Stroud, Joe Burrow, even if you want to go into that extent and that extremity. But I think Fernando Mendoza, I think he stacks up with all of those guys that you've seen drafted. Very high-end, high potential guys who we've seen in years past. I think Bryce Young, I think Caleb Williams, I think that Cam Ward, Burrow, I think very highly of all those guys, obviously, but particularly when it comes to making the easy look easy. The short intermediate passing game is where I think Fernando Mendoza absolutely is extravagant. I think he's absolutely impeccable at the short intermediate passing game. In fact, I would go as far to say easily he's, of all my years evaluating, he's the best short intermediate passing quarterback that I've ever seen. I mean, you look at that passer rating that he was able to put up in the playoff games. I don't think that's unflappable. I think he did that because of his just bingo, just put it on the guy's hands. He's pinpoint bullet accurate. He's almost like a gunslinger, as a lot of people love to refer to it as. Fernando's outstanding. Can push the ball down the field very efficiently, very effectively as well. Tests that middle of the field astronomically well. Extends plays, is tremendous under pressure. There is no pressure moments for a guy like Fernando Mendoza. When you go back and watch the tape at IU, he's almost perfectly flawless. And, hey, I mean, look, if I'm the Raiders, I'm running this thing up to the podium. I'm like, look, this is our guy. I think Brady and the boys and all the executives within the Raiders organization are so deadlocked on what Fernando Mendoza brings, and I think all of us draft pugnants are as well. Dude, I love this guy, and this one's a no-brainer. This is just an absolute foregone conclusion to me is Fernando Mendoza. But the real enigma that we all want to seek out and be able to expedite in this year's draft is, who the hell is better than Fernando? Who is that number 2, that number 3, that number 4 guy when it comes to the quarterback draft class of 2026? And I think that's something that, maybe one of the reasons why, there's a lot of media attention right now, ascending around the NFL scouting combine right now. Maybe some more that we've seen in, recent years. And I absolutely am all for it, as is so many others. But, we're going to do a lowdown of all these quarterbacks. We're going to do a little rundown of all these dudes. But let's talk about a guy that I've been really high on throughout this process. I'm a little bit of the outcast, shall we say, whenever it comes to my evaluation of this particular prospect. We're not doing any rankings today yet on the channel, but we're just going to do a little rundown of all these kind of quarterbacks that we've got in the bundle, in the mix. But Carson Beck from Miami is a guy that, if you had asked me right now, who is that second best guy? Who's that third best guy? I heavily lean towards Carson Beck from Miami, formerly of Georgia as well. Had a very, actually, from a, film and statistical perspective, had a very luxurious career for the University of Georgia as well. So did wonders in Athens, as he did in South Beach as well. But, dude, I love Carson Beck. And I have a good idea that throughout this draft process, I'm going to be labeled as a sucker for Carson Beck. I'm going to have a man crush on Carson Beck, if you will, because, and rightfully so, I will go to hell or high water to be able to advocate for what this guy can bring to the NFL game. And, dude, this dude is super sharp and effective, as we mentioned, as Fernando Mendoza. You talk about that short intermediate passing game. I mean, he's almost automatic. He's almost a dude that, you want to convert on third down, third and short. You want to be able to pick up the chains. Carson Beck is one of those kind of guys that, I mean, he is just pinpoint accurate as it gets. And, not seats to mention, I do think he can be able to push the ball down the field astronomically well. I think he's got one of the better true deep balls of any of the quarterbacks in this year's draft class. Not to cease to mention his ability to be able to push the ball down the field, as well as many of his other contemporaries in this year's draft. I really just, and I think we've mentioned this before, I don't think there's a single throw this guy can't make. I mean, I've seen this guy in so many moments, and yeah, I do realize that, yeah, look, there's a glaring flaw, a glaring weakness. It's, the costly turnovers in games like Louisville and costly turnover in the game against, SMU when Miami was taking that thing deep into the game and, costly interceptions sort of just stalled things out there against the SMU Mustangs that day. So, and obviously on the biggest stage of all, national championship game against Indiana, obviously, coming up short, trying to get Miami within reach in that ball game. I do fully realize that a lot of people are going to dwell on that. A lot of people are going to, press hard against Carson Beck when it comes to that. But I'm here to say, you could look at that, you can dwell on it all you want, but when you watch this guy pound for pound, piece for piece, he is an absolute guy who I absolutely believe could be a baller at the next level. And you want to talk about potential, upside, and everything else. You get this guy in the right system. I mean, we've seen guys like, who are less efficient with the football. Guys who are way more turnover prone. For your big nerds out there, for guys who, they take everything into consideration. They take interceptions into consideration. They take lost fumbles into consideration. And a lot of these people, I've seen in guys in years past who will, stare right down a guy, point their finger at a guy and say, hey, look, this is a guy that's obviously got some glaring issues in the NFL, but we can get, put him under the right system, become an understudy of an already sturdy veteran quarterback in the league, and we can be able to erase some of these turnover deficiencies in a guy's game. And obviously a guy that comes to mind is a guy like Will Levis from Kentucky a few years ago. I never understood the hype. I think Carson Beck is tremendously more efficient than Will Levis. I remember a lot of people, when Will Levis came out, there was a lot of first-round buzz. I remember a lot of people were shocked that he even slid to the second round. However, I was not of the people of that, opinion. Will Levis is a guy that, just snap comes to my mind. If you watch the two guys' tapes, I mean, it's not even head and shoulders, man. I mean, Carson Beck is so much more efficient with the football than a guy like Will Levis. And I understand, turnovers are a big thing. They can stall out, clutch drives. But I'll put it to you this way. This is a weird comparison, but it is something that I was really thinking long and hard of, who the hell is a good comparison for a guy like Carson Beck at the next level? When I watch this guy play, I really do see a lot of, and bear with me when I say this, but I really do see a lot of 2025 Daniel Jones to his game. I really do. Daniel Jones had a hell of a season for the Indianapolis Colts this past season before he had himself a really, ignominious end of the season with that, gruesome injury that he suffered late and obviously stalled out the Colts season. But to me, I think a lot of Carson Beck resembles a lot of the game of Daniel Jones, because if you look at a guy like Daniel Jones, you're seeing a guy who's like, hey, like a lot of people believe in it. They believe in that talent. They believe in that skill set. Just like a guy with Carson Beck. I mean, you see the skill set. It's so obvious. It's right there in front of you. He's one of the most sharpest short intermediate passing quarterbacks I've ever laid eyes on. He's so effective at pushing the ball down the field. There's not a single throw he can't make. And I think he can execute it almost perfectly for any offense in the National Football League. And it's the same thing with Daniel Jones. I mean, you see him go to that Shane Steichen offense this past season with Indianapolis. You saw him play under Brian Daboll in that 2021 season when he was healthy, when he was getting offensive line protection. He was really outstanding. And I think this is what Carson Beck is going to be. He might be another Daniel Jones in the NFL. It took Daniel Jones some time to really, get with the right system. Carson Beck, might be a guy that, you may forget about or, just write off as a bust, 2 or 3 years into his career in the NFL, depending on who he gets drafted to. But then you might look back and be like, wait a second. You remember Carson Beck, who took Miami to the national championship game, who was drafted by, so-and-so, at whatever pick in the draft. And then you're going to be like, wait a second. he's learned a lot in the NFL, and now he's making the right decisions, the right plays. He's not as turnover prone. But yeah, maybe it's a part of his game. Maybe it's just a part of his game that you've seen a part of a lot of guys' games throughout the annals of NFL history. Okay? We've seen, guys like, throughout all time. You look at Joe Namath back in the 70s. You look at Terry Bradshaw back in the 70s. These guys were absolute ballers. But yeah, you know what? They were turnover prone as well. And if you want to just pinch him down and say, we can't draft this guy because he throws interceptions in clutch moments against SMU, he throws clutch is there even such a thing as clutch interceptions? I just came up with it my own. He throws costly interceptions against SMU, Indiana National Championship game. You name it, okay? If we're going to corner this guy based upon an interception flaw in clutch moments, then I would hate to know, Daniel Jones is probably going to be a guy that's going to see some more playing time in Indianapolis in years like that. But, if you got a guy who's throwing for 350 passing yards in a single game, and then just throws an interception late in the fourth quarter, I don't think we're going to knock this guy down entirely and say he completely sucks. Because when you watch a guy like Carson Beck, yeah, sure. Show me the interception against Indiana all you want. Keep rolling it on film, and I'm going to see it every time. But I'm also going to see in 2024 when he went to Bryant-Denny Stadium and was toe-for-toe, almost led an immaculate comeback against the Crimson Tide in the second half of that ball game. What about the game against Georgia Tech where the game went into like 7 overtimes and he was right there, toe-for-toe, all the way to the very end? A lot of people can make the argument that this is a guy that could have elevated and ascended Georgia into the national championship in 2024 if he had not gotten injured in the SEC title game. So there's a lot of what-ifs about Carson Beck, but one thing's for sure, he won a hell of a lot of football games in college. All right, he's been nothing but a winner. I think, he's been to the SEC championship game 2 years in a row. Got injured, missed second half of the win in 2024, played the whole game against Alabama in 2023. Obviously brought Miami to the national championship game last year. So, you be the judge of that, okay? I saw clutch moments even with the Canes against Ole Miss in, the semifinals game. I saw clutch moments for this guy against Pitt in what was one of their crucial wins of the season. And you see this entire skill set on display, and you see it on display without him making crucial turnovers, okay? So for all you pugnates and people out there who want to ridicule Carson Beck because he has a propensity to throw interceptions in the fourth quarter, you might as well go back and watch, do some of your due diligence, do your homework, okay? This guy is a high upside dude as it gets. And I think at the next level, I think he's going to be a little bit, to me, I like that Daniel Jones comparison, but, I wouldn't be surprised, okay, if he has a little bit of Dak Prescott in him as well. Okay, and I understand that Dak Prescott's not the, most glaring of comparisons, especially now into his career. But this is a guy that's going to be a producer of an offense if he gets to the right system, if he gets under the right, wing of a quarterback who can be able to develop him into the next level, because it's all there. It's all there. The making of him as a top 3 quarterback in this year's draft, being that second guy behind Fernando Mendoza, is all there. Yeah, I like Carson Beck. I absolutely do. And, he's definitely going to be very high on my list when it comes to the quarterback rankings, which will be coming out in a few weeks. Yeah. Anyways, moving on. Next guy up. All right. And I feel like we have to address it because, maybe, honest to God, I should have started out with Ty Simpson from Alabama right out the gate. But we're going to go ahead and talk about Ty Simpson right now because there is so much buzz right now about Ty Simpson going into the combine. And when I turn on my TV, all I hear about is Fernando Mendoza and Ty Simpson. I never thought Ty Simpson would be in this chatter of a first-round pick, since the start of this process. I remember when we watched the Rose Bowl game between Indiana and Alabama, earlier this year, and, you see those two guys going toe for toe, stride for stride. I mean, I never thought that we'd be talking about those two guys being the two first quarterbacks taken in the draft at all. Ty Simpson, to me, is a really fascinating one. Yeah, there's a lot of stock that can be bought into him. We're not going to totally knock him down entirely out of proportion. He is getting a talking point right now on this episode, but man, I'll tell you, dude, we want to, dwell on the short intermediate passing game aspect and element of a game. He's automatic, man. I mean, he's absolutely automatic. One of the sharpest short intermediate passing quarterbacks if you just look at the 2025 season alone. There's a reason why he was in the Heisman conversation, largely through the months of September and October and even early November of this past college football season. But, obviously, I do think that there were some significant deficits to Ty Simpson's games. I definitely don't like the lack of ability to push the ball down the field with Ty Simpson. That was something that just never, to me, materialized to his game. You know what? He just throws absolute bullets and darts in the short intermediate game. Really, as well as anybody does in this year's draft. But the lack of a passing game downfield, for Ty Simpson, I was never enthralled by that. I do like a lot about Ty Simpson, so, and then like you said, you can make the case. Yep, look, 1 year as a starter for Bama. Obviously, you see the small sample size that he gives. You can make the case that he's a high ceiling guy. Obviously, backup quarterback behind Bryce Young, backup quarterback behind Jalen Milroe, who we were really high on last year's draft class. You can make the argument that there is a definite high potential ceiling with Ty Simpson. But as I also know, is that there's not only 5 quarterbacks in this year's draft. You got a large mass of quarterbacks in this year's draft who we obviously will allude to in today's video. And obviously my evaluation process, and as is many, is does he stack up with the contemporaries in his class? Does he stack up with his other fellow draftee guys in this year's draft? Does he stack up? Does his game, is it better? Is he more sharper? Is he more efficient than the rest of the guys? What is the skill set of his versus the skill set of another? And that's something that I look at with a guy like Ty Simpson. And I think that's what makes him pale in comparison to other guys in this year's draft. Now, like I said, look, make short story short, I am not a believer in Ty Simpson. I am absolutely not a believer in Ty Simpson. Haven't been high on him this whole process. I've always thought he was really, the title of the video is obviously the curious case of the quarterback class. But, if there was a quarterback who I think is going to be one of the most curious, pun fully intended, it would be Ty Simpson. He's a very curious one, man. I really don't think he's got absolutely anything to lose at the scouting combine, but 1 year of productivity, man. I get it. A lot of people can say high ceiling, high bar, high potential. And, you can even just base it upon, Bama quarterbacks, throughout the course of time. And I think a lot of people love to compare him to Mac Jones. Obviously, Mac Jones only had 1 season as the full-time starter for Bama. But, also what came with that was, a much more prolific season, in my opinion. There is no apples comparison of Ty Simpson to Mac Jones. I think is an absolute rubbish comparison. Mac Jones had one of the most incredible deep balls of a quarterback that I think I've seen in recent years. There is absolutely no comparison, in my estimation, between the two. I just think that's something that concerns me a lot about Ty Simpson, is that is he going to be a check down Kelly in the NFL? The slants, the stick routes, the curl routes, making, the key word, the easy look easy is something that he does well at. But what else are you going to give me? Are you going to be able to push the ball down the field? What are you going to do when the pocket breaks down and you got two elite, edge rushers who run in the 4.4s and the 4.5s, coming at you, breathing down your neck? Are you going to be able to do something with it? We didn't see that oftentimes with Ty Simpson at Bama this past season. Are you going to be able to be ready for the moment? And obviously, I've heard a lot of people say there's nothing that's going to convince anyone that Ty Simpson doesn't get drafted in the first round. All right, so be it. I just sincerely hope your organization has got resources and they're going to be putting things together, puzzle pieces together, because that's one hell of a jigsaw puzzle to put together is Ty Simpson in the NFL. So I definitely hope that they're going to be able to strap up and get ready. I do not think Ty Simpson is worth a first-round pick. I don't think he's worth a day 2 pick. I think he's a day 3 guy, in my estimation. Not a fan of Ty Simpson. I cannot buy into 1 year of productivity. I really can't. Nothing personal against the guy. I just think, dude, this could be calamity. This could be something that we've seen with like other quarterbacks who went way too high. With little potential to little of... I mean, I think about Kenny Pickett, and I've seen him mocked to the Steelers many times, and I can only think, why would the Steelers make the same mistake? Kenny Pickett played a long time at Pitt, but he only had 1 excellent season for the University of Pitt, and that's a lot like Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson was at Bama for several years. Of course, he was on the bench. He was behind 2 elite quarterbacks, who I'm sure he learned a lot from. He was also, playing for Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer. You really can't get much better than that, in college football, obviously. I just think, in my opinion, that, like Kenny Pickett, it was explosive that 1 year at Pitt in 2021. 2025 was explosive for Ty Simpson, but if you're a team like Pittsburgh, I don't know how you can make that mistake again and go right back to that same disposition that the Pittsburgh Steelers have put them in, which has sort of given themselves in somewhat of a quarterback purgatory here recently. I don't think the Steelers are going to make the same mistake. You don't want them to make the same mistake. Ty Simpson's a very avoidable prospect, needless to say. I just don't think he's a guy that you'd want to throw into the fire anytime soon in the NFL, even if you are a believer in him. So I don't believe in Ty Simpson. Who I do believe in, however, is Sawyer Robertson from Baylor. And moving on to our 4th quarterback that we've discussed is Sawyer Robertson from Baylor. And it kind of goes right back to exactly what I said. I'm like, there isn't just 5 quarterbacks in the draft, and you kind of got to pick between the 5. No, hell no. There's a lot of great quarterbacks in this year's draft, a lot of hidden gems, a lot of, maybe possible kept secrets. Now, obviously, we made a video a few weeks ago talking about the recap of the Senior Bowl down in Mobile. I was there physically in the flesh, obviously watching a lot of players build up their stock, showcase their potential and everything else. Sawyer Robertson was one of those guys, just an absolute juggernaut of an offense that he orchestrated at the University of Baylor. Really 2 straight seasons since he had been, taking over starting quarterback position last year. This dude is exceptional. Absolutely exceptional. He, much like a lot of these guys that we see in this year's draft, I mean, just elite short intermediate passing mechanics. This is a guy that's going to easily get you first downs one after another, much like Fernando, much like Carson Beck. He's going to be a guy that's going to be able to be effective and efficient in that department, in that, obligation of an offense. But also, man, if you watch this guy play, man, he pushes the ball down the field better than any of these quarterbacks in the draft. And absolutely he does, man. When it comes to a 1v1 ball, when it comes to a post pattern, Sawyer Robertson is just launching an absolute missile. I mean, he's absolutely launching down the field for huge net gains to be able to absolutely split a defense in half. I mean, Sawyer Robertson's fearless, man. He pushes that thing down the field. He absolutely puts an absolute laser into a defense. Now, Sawyer Robertson, however, he does remind me significantly of a Baker Mayfield S-tier player, and that is exactly who we're going to give him his pro comp to today, is a Baker Mayfield and I think that's his ceiling at the next level, is that of Baker Mayfield. I mean, Baker Mayfield fearlessly pushes the ball down the field like a guy like Sawyer Robertson, confidently puts the ball in the hands of his receivers. Sawyer Robertson's the best at it of all these guys. He's the absolute best of it. Pushes it down the field effectively. Does have a little bit of a pocket feel to him. That's another thing that sort of resembles that of Baker Mayfield. Has significant pocket awareness. He's not really going to be the guy that extends plays for you. Does well, necessarily when the pocket breaks down. This is a guy, when the pocket breaks down, the edge rushers are coming in, they're blitzing in his face. He's going to be able to take off, use a little bit of his underrated athleticism like Baker Mayfield, and be able to matriculate his way for a first down. I like Sawyer Robertson, man. And we got done raving and we got done, trashing two quarterbacks already. I like Sawyer Robertson a lot. And I'm going to sort of, put him and the next quarterback up sort of in a little bit of a binder together, actually, because I think the way that both guys play are so similar. But, solely focusing on a guy like Sawyer Robertson, I love what he brings to the equation. I love that ability to be able to push the ball down the field. I love his, passing efficiency in the short downfield passes, however he wants to do it. He's sort of that traditional pocket-aware quarterback, which I think a lot of people got to realize is not an extinct thing in this league. You still got several dudes in this league who are not known for extending plays, using their legs, in the pocket. A lot of guys who are just the drop-back guys who are still kicking in and getting it done, like Sam Darnold, winning a Super Bowl for the Seattle Seahawks. He's a prime example of that. I think Sawyer Robertson's damn good. Also love Cade Klubnik from Clemson. And these are the two guys that we're sort of going to put into a binder together. We're going to sort of put them on file as one. And Cade Klubnik, maybe not as efficient as a passer as a guy like Sawyer Robertson. You sort of saw that this past season at Clemson. But, man, he pushes the ball down the field as well as Sawyer Robertson does. I think both of these two dudes are the best quarterbacks in the draft when it comes to pushing the ball down the field. Better than any of the guys in the group. Another thing I love about Cade Klubnik is that, we talk about that fearless factor. He is not afraid to take a shot. He is not afraid to take a hit. He is not afraid to have a linebacker absolutely crush him or a pass rusher absolutely crush him. He's going to flick that thing down the field with fearlessness and integrity. He is absolutely one of those guys, and I think he stacks up in terms of being one of the better quarterbacks under pressure in this year's draft. He's absolutely awesome. Now, obviously, the notable thing about Cade, former 5-star to Clemson, sort of was a guy much like many of the quarterbacks that Clemson's had, like in the years past, that were championship-level quarterbacks. Just a guy that, first, when he gets to campus, 5-star athlete, he's like, dude, we have to get this guy on the field as soon as conceivably possible. It's kind of what he was. I remember he was a big-time performer in the ACC championship game against North Carolina many years ago. He did the same thing against SMU last year. So he's definitely got himself a little bit of a winning pedigree at Clemson. He was a guy that came into this season, not just me, not just a few people, but a lot of people put a lot of Heisman praise on this guy's name. Much like a lot of these quarterbacks in this year's draft, he would be one of the ones that we would say, yeah, underachieving as it gets. Absolutely paled in comparison to his 2024 tape, which was out of this world. I think that's one thing that sort of, in terms of that just true passing efficiency to his game, separates him and Sawyer Robertson, but they're so similar in the way that they play. I think Klubnik is not as big as a guy like Sawyer Robertson. I think he's a little bit better under pressure, and also that size of his, he's a little thin pencil of a guy. And if he didn't have such a stellar, 2024 tape, I don't know if he would ever, like I said, I don't think he'd get drafted. Like, his size is notably bad, particularly when it comes to the next level. His size is like really notably bad, and I think that's something that stands out for a guy like Klubnik. But he doesn't play like it, man. He doesn't let that size take advantage of him or disadvantage of him. In his case, he's an astronomically good quarterback. I love him and Sawyer Robertson. I think both of these guys got tremendous potential, and I think I said it best the other day when I said that I think both of these guys are dudes who there is definite football in their career down the road. And I realize that this is a NFL draft content created channel. This is a video circulated around NFL draft, but I obviously know that these guys, and I think it's no surprise to many, that they will be, backup reserve quarterbacks. But man, I just think like these guys are the kind of guys that if your quarterback goes down with an injury, you put them in the mix. They're going to be guys who are going to make some fun, exciting plays for your offense. And, particularly when it comes to a guy like Cade Klubnik, when I watch his game, I see a lot of Nick Foles. I really do. I sort of was the guy that I put as the synonymous quarterback. The similarities are very notable to me when it comes to their stylistic of play. And obviously Nick Foles is the guy that won a lot of games for Philly at Super Bowl. I think a guy like Klubnik, a guy like Sawyer Robertson are going to be guys when they come off the bench. God forbid your quarterback in the NFL gets injured, whoever they back up. But I think these are dudes that come off the bench. They're not going to be scrubs. They're going to be guys that come in here, they execute your offense. They could be able to make a lot of splash plays downfield, a lot of electric plays, and they're going to leave a lot of fans in awe. And then all of a sudden, I think we're going to have ourselves a conversation kind of like what we're having with a lot of quarterbacks, like, for example, Malik Willis right now, who is set to be a free agent this offseason, who is a primary backup quarterback, who we know has potential, who we know is elite. You can even talk about a guy like Jacoby Brissett, who was a really excellent backup quarterback throughout his career and currently with the Arizona Cardinals. It's not a bad job to have. It's not a bad job to secure. But as I was alluding earlier, about, we're supposed to be talking about their NFL potential, but hey, these guys might have, they may have potential in the spring league. They may have potential in the USFL. They may have potential in a league outside of the NFL and do like a lot of guys that we've seen in years past and try to rebound what was once super high potential, particularly with Klubnik. Klubnik's the guy I look to the most because he was a guy that had a lot to gain. He really did. I think there was a lot of first-round buzz projected on his name. And, of course, Clemson just had an absolutely just, downslide, season that was just catastrophic nightmare for those Clemson fans. And Cade Klubnik was a part of it as well. I love these guys. Sawyer Robertson, Cade Klubnik, high potential. Absolutely love what they bring to the equation. I think these are going to be some guys that have serious upside in this league, man. And, much like we said about Carson Beck, man, these guys are really a couple of guys that really get my blood pumping for these guys at the next level. Next guy that we're going to talk about is another guy that really gets my blood pumping. Moving a slide over to Taylen Green from Arkansas, man. This guy is something else. This to me was probably one of the more fun watches of any of the quarterbacks that we've had in this draft cycle. A lot of these guys have been fun to watch, but man, Taylen Green is something out of a superhero movie, dude. Like this guy, honest to God, and I'm going to be quoting a college football coach here. He might be Superman, right? He might be Batman. Okay, that's what Biff Poggi said at Michigan when it come to talk about his quarterback, Bryce Underwood. But legitimately, when I watch Taylor Green, this is a guy out of a superhero movie. He is so sharp. He is so efficient. He is lights out. And every single draft cycle, there is always that project quarterback. And that is such a fun word, a fun term that just gets my blood absolutely pumping. Because when you talk about a project quarterback, you're talking about a dude who has serious potential at the next level, who is a guy that the skill set and the talent is jaw-dropping. It's captivating. It's something like, he's most of the time, these project guys are fun players. Taylor Green is absolutely a fun player. Watch this tape at Arkansas, man. He is one of the biggest human beings I had ever seen. I actually got the privilege to actually meet and get autographs football from Taylor Green at the Senior Bowl. 6'7" quarterback, I believe, is what he's listed at. He's an absolute mammoth of a man. Absolutely sharp. Absolutely sharp. Extending plays. When you watch him on tape, I think he's the best quarterback in the draft when it comes to extending plays. When he's pushed out of the pocket by a blitzing linebacker or a blitzing edge rusher, or if he just wants to be able to showcase his ability, this is a guy that when you watch him play, and I think the scariest intangible to a Taylor Green is you don't know what he's going to do with the football. You really don't. Because when he rolls outside of that pocket, he's either going to cut up field and hit you with a, big chunk play with his legs, because that's how he plays. He's got mobility. He's got agility. He's got insane speed to go along with a big frame that he is in. It's almost like he's like in armor. He's like a knight in armor or something like that. Or plan B would be, when he's getting outside of that pocket, he's going to fling the ball down the field, over your defenders' heads for a good 15 to 20 yard gain. That's exactly who he is on tape, and that's exactly the kind of skill set that is so, intriguing, if you will, when it comes to Taylor Green. I love this guy. I don't know what the upside entails when it comes to him, in contrary to a Sawyer Robertson or a Cade Klubnik or a Carson Beck, who we are really high on. But, Taylor Green is, like I said, he's like something out of a comic book or a superhero movie. I love those legs, man, and I love that frame. This is a guy that, as I mentioned, he's going to live rent-free in my mind this entire draft season. He's actually a guy that I'm really intrigued to see perform at the scouting combine. I want to see the arm. That's one thing I really want to see. I want to see the arm really bad. I want to see how much mustard he can put into a throw. I want to see how much of a missile he can launch. Is he going to launch nukes, or is he just going to launch, just some average casual passes? I think that's a big knock against Taylor Green. Lacks the true skill set of being able to attack the defense in the middle of the field. But there has been times when we've seen him, throw the ball down the field 40, 50 yards with anticipation, and you're almost like, well, he has it in him. He has it in him. He's the kind of guy that I think a lot of his technique, his processing is a kind of thing that needs to be tooled in the NFL. I think it's something that needs to be, he needs to improve his craft a little bit at the next level. Now, a really excellent pro comp for Taylor Green would be a better version, or what we thought of Anthony Richardson coming out of Florida. I absolutely think that. Look, Anthony Richardson's been in the NFL for going on his 4th year now. It's no longer the upside that we saw out of Florida. We've got a good enough tape, good enough footage of what he is at next level. I don't think this guy can be any better or any worse than what Anthony Richardson has been so far in his young NFL journey. I think he sort of has that same skill set, that same frame, that same playing style. And I've heard that comp many times when it pertains to Taylor Green. So, look, man, I love Taylor Green. He is the ultimate project quarterback in this year's draft class. Let's go on and move on to our next guy up. And that's got to be Garrett Nussmeier from LSU. Now, Nussmeier is a really intriguing one as well. Man, it's really hard for me not to like, a little bit of what Garrett Nussmeier brings, but it's also very easily for me not to like what Garrett Nussmeier brings. Now, this is another guy, much like Cade Klubnik, who we had already mentioned, the 2025 preseason just darling is what Garrett Nussmeier was. This guy was a projected top 10 pick. This guy was a projected possible Heisman winner. This guy was a projected possible this and that. Name any accolade gets given to a quarterback. Guy was in the conversation. He had an outstanding 2024 season at LSU. I mean, I remember watching the guy several occasions. I was like, dude, this guy is like, he's going to light it up in the NFL. Like, this guy is going to be like right there with Jaden Daniels, right there with Joe Burrow in terms of being an elite quarterback from the University of LSU. Or, I just saw it. It was all over the place. He was making almost every throw that's required for a quarterback to make. So effective in a short intermediate passing game. I mean, much like all the aforementioned guys. He just makes the easy look easy, right? He makes the simple passes look simple. He makes the hard not so hard. I do think he can also push the ball down the field, but I just think, there is also a little bit of a, deficiency to that. And it was purely exploited this past season at LSU, obviously. He was absolute garbage this season. Absolute garbage. Garrett Nussmeier was absolutely just completely a shell of his former self in the 2024 season. He was quite frankly just no good at all this past year at LSU when you watch him play. And obviously, maybe there was an injury. Maybe there was something that, he was playing through, that he was battling himself out week to week, not telling us in the media about. But it was just so apparent that he was so just not the same guy. And luckily, a guy like Garrett Nussmeier can have the saving grace of the 2024 season that I think really propels his stock. And also, a thing about Nuss is that, unlike some of these guys, like, who are true pocket presence guys, I think that 2024 tape shows that he's also a guy that can be able to extend plays and flick the wrist down the field and be able to hit receivers in stride. And look, another reason why Garrett Nussmeier is a guy that really, he's got a lot going for him in this year's draft. A lot of it's got to do with the Senior Bowl. I think he was absolutely spectacular in the Senior Bowl MVP. He was a guy that we alluded to in that video as well. Garrett Nussmeier was really outstanding. So he's an intriguing one. He's a polarizing one as well. I like what he brings. I think he's got tremendous upside. Definitely is going to be a backup quarterback. I think his situation would really be the situation. That's the word within the word. I think that's going to be something that's really going to be really, really just defines who he is at the next level. Does he go to a place that's going to be system friendly, or is he going to go to a place where he's not going to see any playing time, or he's just not going to thrive at all? System is everything for a guy like Garrett Nussmeier. Let's move on, man. Let's get this thing rolling. Another quarterback I've seen a lot of people hype, Mel Kiper Jr.'s got him in his top 5, is Drew Aller from Penn State. Drew Aller, a lot like Klubnik and Garrett Nussmeier, first-round buzz. Like, plain and simple as that. Like, a lot of people thought this guy could be a first-round pick. You just sort of look at the guy and not really watch him play, and you're like, hey, that's a guy who kind of looks like an NFL starting quarterback. He's got the build. He's got the face, right? But he just, much like a lot of these guys, he is a pocket presence quarterback. And obviously he dealt with a terrible injury midway through the season for an absolute forgettable season for the Penn State Nittany Lions, which I really think affected his stock. And I've said this on numerous accounts. I'd rather have a guy play through a terrible season than not to play at all, because I think it shows a lot more skill set. It shows a lot more, pound for pound work that we can be able to process into this thing. A guy like Drew Aller, I think he had a lot of potential written to him, cut short to an injury this past season for Penn State. Obviously, I just, Aller is kind of a boring watch. I do think one thing I do like to his game is the true deep ball. The arm talent is obviously there. Can't wait to see him at the scouting combine as well, see how much of that arm is loosened up, if he will make any throws at the combine. I'm not even sure 100% that he's going to be at the combine. Don't fact check me on that. The true deep ball is really awesome with a guy like Drew Aller. He's pretty awesome with that, obviously. I just don't see enough efficiency to his game other than that true deep ball rocket launcher type mechanic to his game. And we mentioned there's not a lot of extending plays. I just don't really think he's good under pressure either. Obviously, I think a thing that really is notable is how just poorly he played against tougher competition. And that was a big knock against just the whole Penn State football program as a whole. I think Drew Aller is not the best under pressure. Too much of a pocket fill. He is in the same category as Ty Simpson. Two guys who I think are being really built up by the media right now in terms of their potential and overall ability at the next level. I've seen a lot of guys have Drew Aller top 5, honorable mention guys, but I don't believe in the talent, much like I don't believe in it with Ty Simpson. So pretty much today's video, we have gone over several quarterbacks who we think we can be bust at the next level, guys that we are high on, guys that we are intrigued by, guys who are going to be projects at the next level, and obviously Fernando Mendoza himself, who is the benchmark quarterback in this year's draft, who will be, unless anything miraculous happens, the next franchise quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders, and I believe will be one of the better quarterbacks in years to come in this league, and is by far in a league of his own of the other quarterbacks. This is indeed the curious case of the 2026 quarterbacks. I think, you take away Fernando Mendoza, I believe that two of these quarterbacks in this year's draft will see significant playing time in the NFL. I think at least one will be a starting quarterback in the years to come. I don't 100% know of who that guy will be. Of course, there will be a top 10 quarterback rankings video coming out in the nearby future. And I think I'll be able to reveal a lot of that, reveal a lot more of my spunkier and bolder takes on that platform. But this is just a really quick and simple lowdown of how I feel about a lot of quarterbacks, a little bit of their evaluation. And overall, I like this year's quarterback class. And I'm not going to be able to get out of this video without giving some honorable mentions of some guys who were not mentioned. And I'm going to mention 3 other quarterbacks who I really like. Starting out with Behren Morton from Texas Tech. Love the kid. I think he's got an elite skill set when it comes to pushing the ball down the field. Obviously, a lot of people think Texas Tech, he's a guy that can be able to put the ball into the receiver's hands 20 to 30 yards downfield. He's absolutely one of those guys. Behren Morton, much like a lot of these guys, true pocket presence quarterback, drop back, under center guy, can be able to make some plays. I think he's going to be a valuable backup quarterback for a team to find on day 3 of the draft. And Joey Aguilar from Tennessee, obviously, wanted to come back to the University of Tennessee this past season, was not granted eligibility. I think he's a real intriguing one. He's a real polarizing one as well. I think he definitely fits the mold of polarizing, as a lot of these guys do. I love Joey A, man. I think he's got some elite passing efficiency. Think he pushes the ball down the field really about as good as anyone does, and just an elite launcher of an arm does Joey Aguilar. There's a lot of potential with a guy like Joey Aguilar. I've really sort of gone back and forth on this one. I think, the tools are all there. I think a big combine performance from him is going to be big. I think this is a guy that might be able to flirt with an early 4th round grade, maybe he can be a guy that can be able to get on your team and really challenge your starting quarterback in the NFL throughout training camp. I love Joey Aguilar. He's really intriguing. Finally, we're going to end this thing with Diego Pavia from Vanderbilt, going from Tennessee to Vanderbilt. Obviously, the in-state rivals themselves. But yeah, Diego Pavia, man, I mean, what a fun character throughout college football. Whether you look at him as a hero, whether you look at him as a villain, there is no denying that Diego Pavia was absolute cinema to watch for the University of Vanderbilt. Greatest quarterback probably in school history. I think he's a lot more efficient than a lot of people give him due credit. A lot of people are going to knock him with the size. He's a little bit too small to play in the league. I like Diego Pavia, man. He plays with that as a chip on his shoulder. He plays as fuel to the fire. He absolutely pushes the ball down the field if he has to and be able to help pick his team up. And I love him under pressure. I think that's the number one thing a lot of these guys got to look at, all right? He's an undersized guy. He's built like a linebacker, Maybe he would fit more as a fullback in some people's minds. But, hey, when the pocket breaks down, Diego Pavia is not letting go of the drive. He's going to do everything in his willpower, whether it's using his underrated athleticism as well. Now, obviously, he's going to be a guy he's probably one of the most fascinating one, and I think he would also fit the mold as very curious at the next level, as is the title of this video. But, yeah, Diego Pavia, man, really interesting. I think a lot of these guys fall into the category of being day 3 spotlight guys in this honorable mention category. But I would say probably you look to the 5th and the 6th round. This is a guy that if your need is a backup quarterback in the NFL, if you need a guy to be able to be a guy, to be able to sit on the bench and learn an offense, Diego Pavia is a good guy. Let's see if the character issues can be able to be adjusted in the NFL. You would hate for him to have that, Johnny Manziel turnout, or as we've seen in other guys. I don't think he's going to be able to be difficult with his character. He's a very diligent guy, a lot more than a lot of people think. Can't play for Vanderbilt if you're not diligent. Think round 5 on day 3 for a guy like Diego Pavia. So thank you guys so much for entitling yourself to the curious case of the 2026 NFL draft class for quarterbacks. Like I said, this is your host, Steven Trader. Hope you guys have an absolute blessed rest of your day and enjoy all upcoming draft content right here at Steve Money's Take, coming up in the nearby weeks leading up to April's NFL draft. This is your host, Steven Trader.